The Otter transport plane bucked hard, dropping a dozen feet before its skis found purchase on the packed ice runway. Inside, Anya Sharma didn't flinch. Her hands, resting loosely in her lap, remained perfectly still. She was 48, with lines etched around her eyes that spoke more of sun and salt than of laughter. Her hair, once black, was now a tapestry of silver and steel, pulled back in a severe, functional knot. The manifest listed her as the new logistics coordinator for Polaris 6, a title that sounded important but meant she was, in essence, the station's highest-paid stock clerk. The ramp lowered, blasting the cabin with a crystalline cold that stole the breath. Two figures were waiting, swaddled in thick, crimson parkas that marked them as station crew. The taller of the two, a man with a brutish jaw and the swagger of someone who peaked in high school, stepped forward. His name tag read, Kellen Security Chief. Anya Sharma? He barked, his voice muffled slightly by his balaclava. He didn't offer a hand, just scanned the single duffel bag at her feet with a look of derision. That all you got? We told procurement we needed someone who could handle heavy-duty requisitions, not a tourist. Anya met his gaze. Her own was a flat, unreadable gray. It's all I need, she said, her voice low and even, the cold air doing nothing to make it tremble. The second man, older and thinner, stepped forward. Dr. Evans, station director, was stitched above his pocket. Kellen, let's get her inside. We have a blizzard warning for 1800 hours. His tone was one of weary authority, the kind that had long given up on managing personalities and settled for managing schedules. He gave Anya a cursory once-over, his eyes lingering on her age, the slight, almost imperceptible stiffness in her left knee. Disappointment clouded his features. He had requested a former military quartermaster, someone robust and young. He had received this, right? This way, Sharma, Kellen grunted, turning his back on her before she'd even taken a step. He expected her to struggle with her bag. He wanted her to. Anya shouldered the duffel. It weighed 80 pounds, but her motion was fluid, economical. She followed them toward the interconnected domes of the station, a low-slung scar of civilization on an endless expanse of white. The wind was a physical thing, a predator scouring the ice, and the silence between its howls was absolute. Inside, the transition was jarring. The sterile, recycled air smelled of ozone, coffee, and damp wool. Fluorescent lights hummed, casting a sterile pallor on the faces of the half-dozen scientists and technicians who glanced up from their work. Their gazes were curious, then dismissive. Anya saw it register. A middle-aged woman, not a burly ex-roughneck. She was an anomaly, an administrative error sent to the most isolated place on Earth. Evans led her to a small office, little more than a closet with a desk and a terminal. Your predecessor left things a mess. Kellen will give you the security brief. Your primary job is inventory management and coordinating supply flights. Don't touch anything in the labs, don't wander outside without an escort, and don't get in the way. The welcome speech was a list of restrictions. Understood, Director, Anya said. Evans nodded, already turning away. Kellen, show her the warehouse. Make sure she understands the payload limits. We can't afford any mistakes. He walked off, his message clear. He was already anticipating them. Kellen smirked, a cruel twist of his lips. All right, Anya, let's go see if you can count. The warehouse is this way. He led her down an echoing metal corridor to a vast, cavernous dome chilled to just above freezing. Shelves soared 40 feet high, crammed with crates, equipment, and vacuum-sealed food. A heavy-duty forklift sat near the bay doors. This is your kingdom, Kellen said, waving a hand dismissively. Rule number 1. You don't operate the lift. You call me or one of my guys. Rule number 2. Everything is triple-checked. You sign for it, it's on you if it's wrong. We run out of CO2 scrubbers or insulin because you can't do basic math and people die. Clear? Crystal? Anya replied, her eyes not on him but scanning the shelves. She was cataloging, assessing, her mind a silent, whirring computer. She noted the disorganized placement of critical medical supplies, the inefficient stacking of emergency rations. She saw a dozen failure points in the first 30 seconds. Good. Now, the first task. Evans wants a full audit of the emergency medical kits. There are 50 of them up there. He pointed to a pallet on a shelf 30 feet up. I need a component-by-component count. Your list needs to match the manifest exactly. Have it on my desk by 0800 tomorrow. He expected her to protest, to say it was impossible without the lift he'd just forbidden her from using. He wanted to see her flustered and helpless. Anya simply looked at the shelf, then at the nearby support columns. She gauged the distance, the angles. Fine, she said. His smirk faltered. Fine? You gonna grow wings? I'll manage, she said, her voice betraying nothing. She turned her back on him and walked to the nearest terminal, her fingers already flying across the keyboard, pulling up the schematic of the warehouse shelving. She wasn't looking for the manifest. She was looking for structural load points. Kellen watched her for a moment, a seed of irritation planting itself in his gut. She wasn't playing her part. She wasn't intimidated. He snorted, then stalked out of the warehouse, the heavy door hissing shut behind him, leaving Anya alone in the echoing cold. He'd break her. The Arctic always broke the ones who thought they were tougher than they were. He'd make sure of it. The dismissal solidified over the next week, hardening from casual condescension into something openly hostile. Anya was precise, efficient, and unervingly quiet. She completed the medical kit audit by 0600 the next morning. When Kellen arrived, he found the report printed on his desk, and the 50 kits neatly stacked on the floor, a climbing rope and harness coiled beside them. He didn't ask how she'd gotten them down. The silent evidence of her competence was an insult. He found a single discrepancy on her audit, a missing suture kit from box number 42, and stormed into the warehouse to confront her. Hey, Sharma, you missed one, he yelled, waving the printout. Anya looked up from her terminal, where she was reorganizing the entire digital inventory system, a task his own team had failed to complete for 6 months. No, I didn't, she said calmly. Kit number 42 was short 1 suture pack. I cross-referenced the original shipping manifest from McMurdo. It was never packed. The error is in the originating documents, not my count. Kellen's face flushed a dull red. He crumpled the paper in his fist. She had not only done the job, she had done it better than anyone ever had. She had exposed a flaw that went back months. It made him look incompetent. From then on, he and his 2 security cronies, a pair of burly young men named Decker and Ross, made her life a small hell. Her tools would go missing. Files on her terminal would be mysteriously corrupted. They would call her on the radio with pointless, menial tasks at all hours. Through it all, Anya remained a placid lake. She never complained, never rose to the bait. She simply found another tool, restored the file from a personal backup she'd had the foresight to create, and performed the menial task with the same quiet efficiency as her most critical duties. Her composure was infuriating. The conflict came to a head in the second week. A pallet of sensitive geological sensors needed to be moved. It was a delicate 2-person job with the forklift. Kellen, deliberately, was nowhere to be found. Decker and Ross stood by, arms crossed, watching Anya as she stood by the pallet. Looks like the boss is busy, Decker sneered. Guess you'll just have to wait. The seismic array needs to be deployed before the ice shift at 1400. Anya stated, not looking at them. It's 1320 now. Sucks to be you, Ross chuckled. Director Evans is real particular about those sensors. He'll have your hide if you're late. Anya looked at the forklift. She looked at the pallet. Then she walked to the control panel of the warehouse's small gantry crane, a piece of equipment usually reserved for engine maintenance. They watched, dumbfounded, as she powered it on, her movements sure and steady. She bypassed the standard safety lockouts with a few keystrokes, a sequence no one else on the station knew. In minutes, she had the crane's harness perfectly balanced around the pallet. Kellen chose that moment to walk in. He saw her at the controls, the multimillion-dollar sensor array hovering 5 feet off the ground. His face contorted with rage. "Sharma, what the hell do you think you're doing? I told you not to touch the heavy equipment," he roared, storming toward her. "The job needed doing," Anya said, her focus on the delicate process of lowering the pallet. "You're going to break it, you stupid old woman," he spat, his voice echoing in the dome. "You're nothing but a liability." Evans was right. We needed a man for this job, not some washed-up desk jockey who's probably got osteoporosis. He was in her space now, jabbing a thick finger toward her face. Anya didn't react. She gently set the pallet down, the landing so soft it was silent. She powered down the crane. Only then did she turn to face him. "You're emotional, Kellen. It's making you sloppy," she said, her voice still impossibly calm. The insult, delivered so clinically, was worse than any shout. It was a diagnosis of his inadequacy. Kellen's control snapped. He shoved her hard. "You don't talk to me like that." Anya stumbled back a step, her boot catching on a floor plate. It was the first time he had seen her off balance, and it fed his rage. He saw weakness. "I'm the chief of security here. You're worth nothing. You do what I say," he snarled, stepping forward and balling his fist. Decker and Ross shifted uncomfortably. This was going too far, but they wouldn't dare intervene. "You are not in control of yourself," Anya said, her eyes never leaving his. They weren't angry. They weren't scared. They were analytical. She was watching him the way a mechanic watches a failing engine, noting every sputter, every misfire. That clinical assessment was the final trigger. He swung. It wasn't a slap. It was a punch, a closed fist aimed at her head. He wanted to hurt her, to see her crumble, to finally get the reaction he craved. Anya's movement was a blur of economy. She didn't block it in a conventional way. She turned her body, letting the punch graze her shoulder, absorbing and redirecting the force. Her left hand came up, not to strike, but to gently cup the back of his neck. Her right hand pressed 2 fingers, firm but not aggressive, into the pressure point just below his ear. Kellen's entire body locked up. A jolt, like 1,000 volts of ice, shot down his spine. His muscles seized, his arm fell uselessly to his side, and his breath hitched in his throat. He was completely immobilized, standing upright but powerless. Terror, stark and absolute, flashed in his eyes. Anya held him there for 3 long seconds. The warehouse was utterly silent save for the hum of the freezer units. Decker and Ross stared, their jaws hanging open. She leaned in, her voice a whisper that was colder than the Arctic wind. "You will never, ever put your hands on me again." Then she released him. Kellen staggered back, gasping, clutching his neck. The feeling was already fading, but the phantom shock remained. It wasn't pain. It was a terrifying, neurological shutdown. He looked at her, truly looked at her, for the first time. The quiet, middle-aged woman was gone. In her place was something else, something ancient and dangerous. Before he could find his voice, the world ended. A soundless, blinding flash of white light flooded the warehouse, pouring through the high bay windows. It was followed a half-second later by a deep, gut-vibrating hum. The overhead lights flickered, turned a sickly orange, and died. The emergency batteries kicked in, casting the cavernous space in a blood-red glow. On the wall, a dozen different alarms began to shriek at once. "What the hell was that?" Ross yelled, his voice cracking. Anya was already moving. She didn't look at Kellen or his stunned cronies. She was at the main communications panel, her face illuminated by the dying screen. "Massive coronal mass ejection," she said, her voice cutting through the rising panic. "Direct hit. The magnetosphere won't have stopped at all. EMP." As if on cue, the emergency lights buzzed loudly and went out, plunging them into absolute darkness. The alarms died with a final, choked wail. The only sound left was the rising shriek of the wind outside and the frantic, terrified breathing of the 4 people in the warehouse. The station's heart had stopped. The silence in the darkness was heavier than any sound. It was a thick, suffocating blanket of failure. The station wasn't just without power. It was dead. The hum of the life support, the whir of the climate control, the buzz of the servers, the entire symphony of survival had ceased. In its place was a terrifying void, punctuated by the frantic gasps of Kellen's men. "My radio's dead." Decker's voice was a high-pitched squeak. "Comms are completely out." "The backup generator should have kicked in," Kellen stammered, his earlier bravado completely gone, replaced by the shaky uncertainty of a man whose rulebook had just been incinerated. He fumbled for his high-powered flashlight, its beam cutting a frantic, nervous path through the gloom. "It's automated. Why didn't it kick in?" "The EMP would have fried the transfer switch." Anya's voice came out of the black, calm and measured. "It wasn't a guess. It was a diagnosis. The generator itself is probably shielded, but the electronic systems that activate it are not. They're fused." Her placid tone in the face of catastrophe was more unsettling than any scream. While the others were reacting to the event, she was already 3 steps ahead, analyzing the cascading points of failure. A loud crack echoed from the corridor, followed by the sound of shattering ice and groaning metal. "What was that?" Ross cried, his light joining Kellen's, their beams dancing like panicked fireflies. "Thermal shock," Anya said. "The outer dome's heating elements are off. The temperature differential between the interior and the exterior is now extreme. The structure is contracting. We have a limited window before we have catastrophic integrity failure." Director Evans's voice, shrill with panic, suddenly echoed from down the hall. "Kellen, security, report. What is happening?" Kellen, momentarily jolted back into his role, shouted back, "Sir, massive power failure. We're trying to assess." He started to move, but his steps were uncertain. He was a security chief trained to handle human threats, not the complete and total collapse of the environment that kept them alive. His protocols were useless. Evans appeared in the doorway, his face a pale mask of terror in the beam of his own flashlight. He was followed by Dr. Eris Thorne, a young, brilliant but nervous climatologist. "The backup generator didn't start. The core temperature is dropping. We'll freeze to death in hours." Evans shrieked, his authority dissolving into raw fear. I'm working on it, sir," Kellen said, his voice lacking any conviction. He started toward the emergency panel, then stopped, clearly having no idea what to do with it now that it was a dead sheet of metal. Anya stepped past all of them. She didn't run. Her movements were deliberate, conserving energy, betraying no panic. She went to a large, unassuming gray locker in the corner of the warehouse, a locker Kellen had never bothered to inspect, assuming it was for janitorial supplies. She keyed in a 5-digit code on its mechanical lock. The door swung open. Inside was not cleaning equipment. It was a meticulously organized go bag, a set of specialized tools, a small oxygen tank, and a compact, military-grade satellite phone. Kellen stared. That wasn't station equipment. "That phone won't work," Eris Thorne said, his teeth chattering. "The solar flare would have knocked out the satellites. Total communication blackout." "Most of them," Anya corrected, pulling on a pair of insulated work gloves. She didn't even try the phone. She was after the tools. "But not all. That's not the priority. Heat is, then water, then comms." She spoke as if reciting a checklist. Her mind had already triaged their entire survival situation. She picked up a heavy-duty wrench and a diagnostic multimeter. "Evans, what's the status of the reserve heating oil?" The director just stared at her, dumbfounded by her sudden command. It's in the sub-level tank. But the pumps are electric." "Eris," Anya said, turning to the young scientist. He flinched, surprised to be addressed. "The station schematics. You have them on your personal tablet." "Yes, but the batteries." "Is it in a Faraday pouch?" Eris's eyes widened. "Yes, actually. I'm paranoid about data corruption." "Get it," Anya commanded. It wasn't a request. As Eris scurried off, Anya turned to Kellen. The backup generator is a diesel V12, correct? Standard marine model. Kellen nodded dumbly. Yeah. How did you? Show me the manual override for the fuel line and the ignition sequence, she said, already walking toward the sublevel access hatch. She didn't wait for his answer, assuming he would follow. For the first time, Kellen did. He and his men, the self-proclaimed kings of the station, trailed in the wake of the logistics clerk like confused children. The sublevel was even colder, the air already biting. Their breath plumed in thick clouds. Anya's flashlight beam was steady, unlike the others. It didn't dance. It investigated. She found the generator, a massive block of yellow-painted steel. She ran a hand over the main control panel. It was cold and dead. The transfer switch is fried, just as you said, Kellen mumbled, stating the obvious. He felt a desperate need to contribute, to reclaim some shred of his authority. Anya ignored him. Her light was tracing the fuel lines, the wiring harnesses, the air intake. The electronics are gone, but the mechanics are simple. It's just an engine. It needs fuel, air, and a spark. Eris returned, clutching his tablet. I have the schematics. Show me the auxiliary power conduit for the geothermal science probe, Anya said, not taking her eyes off the engine. Eris fumbled with the screen. Here. It has its own isolated battery backup, but it's only designed to power the probe's memory core for a few hours. It's not nearly enough to... It's enough to power a single ignition coil, Anya interrupted. She pointed to a junction box on the far wall. That's the access point. Kellen, get me a wire spool and a heavy-duty cutter. Decker, find the manual fuel pump primer. There's a T-bar handle near the main tank. Ross, stand by the main air intake. When I tell you, you're going to manually open the butterfly valve. Don't do it a second before. The three men, who minutes before had been mocking her, now stared at her, then at each other. For a moment, Kellen hesitated, his pride warring with the undeniable logic of her commands. The groaning of the station's structure above them, a sound like a dying beast, made the decision for him. Fear was a greater motivator than pride. He turned and ran to get the tools. What followed was a masterclass in improvisation. Anya moved with a surgeon's precision, her hands sure and swift in the biting cold. She stripped wires, bypassed scorched relays, and rerouted circuits. She explained nothing. She simply gave short, clear, unambiguous instructions. The men, accustomed to Kellen's blustering orders, found themselves responding to her quiet authority without question. She wasn't leading them. She was directing them, moving them like pieces on a chessboard. Eris, what's the voltage on that backup? She asked, her head deep in the generator's guts. 12 volts, 200 amps, but it'll drain in minutes if we draw that much. Won't need minutes, Anya murmured. She connected her makeshift wiring. Kellen, I need you on the compression release. Cycle it twice, then hold. Kellen, his hands now greasy and stained, did as he was told. He was no longer the security chief. He was a component in her machine. Anya stood back. All right, listen carefully. This is going to work once. Decker, prime the fuel line. You'll feel the pressure build. When it's firm, you shout. Ross, when you hear him shout, open the intake. Eris, when the intake is open, you complete the circuit on the tablet. There will be a spark. Kellen, the second you hear the engine try to turn over, drop the compression release. Got it. Everyone nodded, their faces grim and focused in the intersecting flashlight beams. They were a team, forged in the last 10 minutes by a woman they had dismissed as worthless. Decker, go. Decker pumped the T-bar. It's getting tight. It's firm. Now. Ross. Anya barked. Ross wrenched the valve open. A gasp of frigid air hissed into the engine. Eris. Eris tapped his screen. A fat, blue spark leaped from Anya's jury-rigged wire to the ignition coil. Kellen. With a deafening cough, the massive diesel engine shuddered. A plume of black smoke erupted from the exhaust. Kellen dropped the release handle. The engine sputtered, caught, and then roared to life. Its thunderous rhythm was the most beautiful sound any of them had ever heard. The sublevel was instantly filled with noise, heat, and the acrid smell of diesel. A single, bare bulb wired directly to the generator flickered on, casting them all in a harsh yellow light. They had power. For a moment, they all just stood there, stunned, breathing in the warm, dirty air. Evans, who had been watching from the hatchway like a frightened ghost, began to sob with relief. Kellen looked at his filthy hands, then at the roaring engine, then at Anya. She was already disconnecting her wiring, coiling it neatly. She hadn't celebrated. She hadn't even smiled. She was simply moving on to the next problem. "The generator is on a closed loop," she said, her voice cutting through the engine's roar. "It's powering this level and nothing else. We need to manually patch it into the station's main grid. Eris, pull up the schematics for the primary power distribution node. We have to bypass the fried master breakers." Kellen finally found his voice. It was hoarse, humbled. Where did you learn to do all this?" Anya paused, her back to him. She looked at the engine, her expression unreadable in the stark light. "When your life depends on a piece of equipment, you learn how to fix it." She turned, her gray eyes sweeping over them. "The generator is a temporary fix. The station's structural integrity is still compromised. The comms are still down. We bought ourselves a few hours, nothing more. Now, let's get to work." The revival of the generator was a false dawn. It provided heat and light, staving off the immediate threat of freezing, but it did nothing to solve their fundamental problem. They were utterly alone. The communications array was a ruin of melted circuit boards and scorched antennae. The blizzard, which had arrived on schedule, was now a physical wall of white, a Category 5 hurricane of snow and ice. The station groaned and popped around them, a constant, terrifying reminder of its slowly failing structure. Director Evans, buoyed by the return of heat, tried to reassert his authority. "Excellent work, everyone. Now, Kellen, I want a full damage report. Eris, run diagnostics on all science equipment. Sharma, you've done well, but this is now a matter for the command staff." No one moved. Kellen, Decker, and Ross didn't look at Evans. They looked at Anya. Eris Thorne, clutching his tablet, stood closer to her than to the director. In the span of an hour, the station's entire power dynamic had been rewritten. Authority was no longer a title on a parka. It was the quiet confidence of the woman coiling a length of wire. Anya finished her task and looked at Evans. "With respect, Director, your command staff's priority should be evacuation. The generator is consuming fuel at an unsustainable rate. The manufacturer's specs give it a 72-hour runtime on a full tank. We're already 6 hours in. When it runs out, we lose heat for good. Furthermore, the continuing thermal stress on the outer dome will lead to a containment breach. We have, at best, 48 hours before this place becomes our tomb." Her assessment was brutal, clinical, and utterly devoid of emotion. It was this lack of panic that made her words so terrifyingly believable. "Evacuation? To where?" Evans sputtered. "We're 300 miles from the nearest outpost. No one is coming for us." "That's not true," Anya said. She walked over to a large topographical map of the region pinned to the wall, its surface now rippled from the initial thermal shock. "There's a shelter here." She tapped a point on the map, a desolate spot 20 clicks northeast. It's designated Outpost Indigo. It's a predigital Cold War-era survival bunker. It's not on any modern charts, but it's there. Kellen squinted at the map. "There's nothing there. That's just a glacial plain. I've been over it on patrol." "You went over it. You didn't look for it?" Anya corrected him gently. "It's buried. The entrance is camouflaged. But it's stocked with long-term rations, has a geothermal heating pipe, and most importantly, a high-frequency radio with its own subterranean power source, shielded by 100 feet of ice and rock. It's designed to survive things like this." Evans stared at her, aghast. "How could you possibly know that?" Anya's gaze was distant. I've read the old contingency files. The ones nobody looks at anymore. It was a partial truth, and she knew it, but it was all she was willing to give. The plan was insane. A 20-kilometer trek, on foot, through an Arctic blizzard, with temperatures dropping to 60 below zero. It was a suicide mission, but the alternative, staying in the dying station, was a death sentence. "We'll never make it," Decker mumbled, voicing the fear in everyone's eyes. "The wind chill alone will kill us." "We will if we move fast and we move smart," Anya countered. She turned from the map and began issuing instructions, her voice the calm center of their swirling fears. "We'll take the electric snowcat. His batteries are dead, but its chassis is our best bet for a sled. We'll load it with survival gear, medical supplies, and emergency rations. We'll pull it in shifts. Eris, calculate our energy expenditure versus caloric intake. I want to know exactly how many rations each person needs to consume per hour to avoid hypoglycemia. Kellen, you and your men will strip the emergency shelters for anything useful. Thermal blankets, chemical hand warmers, flares. Evans, you will be in charge of the personnel manifest. We take only who is essential. No sentimental items. Weight is our enemy." She was a whirlwind of purpose. While the others were still processing the horror of their situation, she was already deep into the logistics of their escape. She moved through the warehouse, her original domain, with an expertise that was breathtaking. She wasn't just grabbing supplies. She was selecting them with an almost clairvoyant understanding of their future needs. She bypassed the standard issue parkas, instead pulling out older, heavier suits of waxed canvas and fur from a long-forgotten crate. "These are better," she explained to a questioning Eris. "The synthetics will hold moisture from sweat and freeze. These breathe." She packed medical kits, but not the standard ones. She broke them open, taking only specific items. Tourniquets, morphine syrettes, plasma expanders, trauma shears. It was a combat medic's loadout. She packed tools. A pry bar, a small block and tackle, 100 feet of high-tensile rope. Every choice was deliberate, weighted with unseen experience. The trek began 4 hours later. 8 of them, Anya, Evans, Kellen, Decker, Ross, Eris, and 2 shell-shock geologists, were bundled so heavily they were barely recognizable. They clipped themselves to a guide rope, a human train pulling a dead machine across a landscape of utter hostility. Anya was at the front, a compass in one hand, a GPS unit she'd salvaged and powered with a hand crank in the other. The wind was a physical blow, a constant, grinding pressure that sought to scour them from the face of the earth. The world was a maelstrom of white. Visibility was less than 5 feet. They were navigating blind, guided only by Anya's instruments and her seemingly innate sense of direction. For hours, they leaned into the wind, the only sounds the shriek of the storm, the groan of the sled on the ice, and their own ragged breathing. The first crisis came 6 hours in. Ross, the younger of Kellen's men, stumbled and fell. He didn't get up. When Decker and Kellen hauled him to his feet, his eyes were glassy, his speech slurred. "I'm so tired," he mumbled. "Just need to rest a minute." "Get him up," Kellen shouted, shaking him. "You stop, you die. Get up." Anya was there in a second. She didn't shout. She pulled down Ross's balaclava, ignoring his weak protests. She placed her bare fingertips on his cheek. "He's not just tired. He's hypothermic," she diagnosed instantly. "His core temperature is dropping. Shouting at him won't help." She unclipped herself from the main line. "Everyone huddle up. Form a perimeter with your backs to the wind. Get the sled in the middle." They obeyed without hesitation. In the relative calm of their small human bubble, Anya went to work. She had Ross on the sled, and with Decker's help, she stripped off his wet outer layers. She pulled a silver mylar blanket from her pack and wrapped him in it, then covered him with 2 of the heavy wool blankets. "Eris, the thermos with the high-sugar tea. Give it to him. Small sips," she ordered. She pulled a packet of chemical warmers from her own coat, cracked them, and tucked them into Ross's armpits and groin, targeting the major arteries. Her movements were practiced, efficient, the actions of someone who had done this a dozen times before. Kellen watched, his face a mixture of shame and awe. He was the security chief. Ross was his man. He should have seen the signs. He should have known what to do. He had been trained in Arctic survival, but his training was a theoretical checklist. Hers was a terrifying, ingrained reality. They rested for 20 minutes, a dangerously long time. But when they got Ross to his feet, the color had returned to his face and the slurring was gone. "We need to keep moving," Anya said. "But he can't pull. He'll ride on the sled. That means we all have to pull harder." No one complained. They simply adjusted their harnesses and leaned back into the storm. Kellen took the position directly behind Anya. He watched her, a small, dark figure against the infinite white, her back ramrod straight, her pace unchanging. She was a machine. The landscape, which had been a flat plain, began to change. They were entering a field of sastrugi, wave-like ridges of hard-packed snow carved by the wind. They were forced to navigate a maze of sharp, icy crests, a task that drained their dwindling energy. At the top of one particularly large ridge, Anya stopped. She held up a hand. The GPS in her other hand was beeping erratically. "What is it?" Kellen asked, coming up beside her. "GPS is unreliable here. Too much magnetic interference from the ore deposits in the mountains," she said, peering into the whiteout. "The map says we should be turning to a heading of 040 degrees. But my gut says that's wrong." "The map is the map," Evans argued, his voice thin and reedy. "We have to follow the plan." Anya didn't answer. She was sniffing the air, her head tilted. "The wind is shifting. The barometric pressure is dropping faster than it should. There's a pressure ridge ahead. A big one. The map's route will take us right into its weakest point." She unclipped from the sled. "Stay here." Before anyone could object, she vanished into the swirling snow, moving with a speed and silence that was unnerving. She was gone for 10 minutes, an eternity in the storm. The others huddled together, a small, terrified island of humanity. The thought that she might not come back, that their one competent leader had been swallowed by the void, was a terror colder than the wind. Then, she reappeared, a ghost emerging from the white. There was a new urgency in her posture. "The main ridge is a kilometer north. It's unstable. We'd never make it across. But I found a bypass, a collapsed ice cave. It's tight, but it should cut straight through the base of the ridge. It'll be dangerous, but it's faster. It's our only shot." There was no debate. They followed her. The entrance to the cave was a dark slit in a wall of blue ice, barely wide enough for the sled. They had to unload it and pass the gear through by hand. Inside, the wind died, and the silence was profound. The only light came from their headlamps, reflecting off a billion ice crystals, making it feel like they were inside a massive, shattered diamond. They were halfway through the narrow tunnel when the ice above them groaned, a deep, resonant sound that vibrated through the soles of their boots. Small shards of ice rained down. "Move!" Anya yelled, her voice echoing in the confined space. "It's settling. Go, go, go!" They scrambled, pushing and pulling the sled, their panic giving them a fresh burst of adrenaline. They cleared the tunnel and emerged back into the howling wind just as a section of the cave behind them collapsed with a deafening roar. They had missed being crushed by seconds. They lay panting on the snow, staring at the blocked passage. They were alive, but only because she had been right. Her gut had been more accurate than their maps, more reliable than their technology. It was Eris who finally broke the silence. He had been tasked with keeping Anya's personal duffel on the sled. During the frantic exit from the cave, the bag had fallen and a corner had torn open. A small, heavy object had fallen out onto the snow. Eris picked it up. It was a metal tag on a simple chain, worn and dark with age. On one side was a name, Sharma A. On the other was a symbol he didn't recognize, but which was etched into his memory from documentaries and films. A golden eagle, clutching a trident, a pistol, and an anchor. He stared at it, his mind struggling to connect the woman who cataloged supplies with the iconic symbol in his hand. He looked up at Anya, who was already on her feet, checking her compass. She was just their logistics coordinator, an older woman who was good in a crisis. Eris's fingers were numb, but he managed to pull out his tablet. The battery was almost dead, but it flickered to life. He didn't need the station's network. He had downloaded dozens of military personnel databases for a historical research project months ago. On a hunch, he typed in the name, Sharma A. He cross-referenced it with the symbol. The result loaded, stark and unbelievable on the small screen. Sharma, Anya. Rank, Master Chief Petty Officer, Ret. Service, U.S. Navy. Unit, Naval Special Warfare Development Group. 20 years. Eris's breath caught in his throat. Naval Special Warfare Development Group. DevGru. The official, sanitized name for the unit the world knew by another title. SEAL Team 6. He looked from the screen to the woman standing against the storm. The quiet logistics coordinator. The woman Kellen had shoved, had called, worth nothing. A 20-year veteran of the most elite special operations force on the planet. Kellen, seeing the look on Eris's face, crawled over. What is it? What did you find? Eris didn't speak. He just turned the tablet screen toward him. Kellen read the words. He read them again. The color drained from his face, leaving it a sickly, chalky white against the red of his parka. His eyes flickered from the screen to Anya's back. He saw it all in a sudden, horrifying flash of clarity. The way she moved, the way she assessed threats, her impossible calmness, the precise, economical way she had neutralized him in the warehouse, not with brute force, but with terrifying, expert knowledge of the human body. It wasn't a lucky move. It was training, decades of it. He had hit a master chief. He had assaulted a legend. The shame was a physical blow, more stunning than any punch. He felt his stomach turn, and he bent over, retching onto the pristine snow. The station's bully, the self-important security chief, was nothing. He was less than nothing. He had stood in the presence of true strength and had been too arrogant and too stupid to even recognize it. The revelation settled over the small group not with a shout, but with a profound, unnerving silence. Eris Thorne held the tablet like a holy relic, its screen casting a ghostly light on his face. Kellen was still on his hands and knees, the dry heaves of his shame racking his body. Decker and Ross, seeing Kellen's reaction, crept closer to look at the screen. Their faces went slack with the same disbelieving awe. Director Evans, who had been complaining about the cold, fell silent, his mouth slightly agape. Anya, oblivious, was 50 feet ahead, studying the terrain. The wind whipped her hair, a few strands of silver escaping her hood, but she stood as if rooted to the ice, a fixed point in the chaos. She had felt the shift in a group's dynamic behind her, the sudden cessation of movement and chatter. She turned, her gray eyes sweeping over them, her expression questioning. "We're losing light and temperature," she called out, her voice cutting through the wind. "We need to keep moving. What's the problem?" No one answered. They just stared. It was Eris who finally moved. He slowly, reverently, tucked the dog tag back into the torn corner of her duffel bag. He stood up and looked at her, his expression one of complete, unadulterated reverence. "No problem, ma'am," he said, his voice barely a whisper. The ma'am was unconscious, instinctive. It was the word for a senior NCO, a term of deep, earned respect. The word hung in the air. Anya's eyes narrowed slightly. She heard it. She registered the change. But she didn't comment on it. There was no time. "Then let's move," she said, turning back to her task. The journey resumed, but the entire dynamic had been irrevocably altered. The guide rope, which had been a simple safety tool, now felt like a leash connecting them to their only hope. Anya was no longer just the woman at the front. She was their commander. Her quiet, clipped instructions were no longer the suggestions of a capable colleague. They were orders to be followed without question. Kellen, she said, not looking back. Take point. 200 meters ahead. Your eyes are younger than mine. Scan for fissures. Shout if you see anything that looks like a shadow on the snow. Kellen scrambled to his feet, his face still pale. Yes, ma'am, he didn't hesitate. He unclipped his personal tether and moved ahead, his posture different. His usual swagger was gone, replaced by a tense, focused alertness. He was no longer a bully trying to prove his dominance. He was a soldier following the orders of a superior officer. The respect was silent, but it was in everything they did. When they stopped for their hourly ration break, Decker, without being asked, took Anya's water flask and used his own body heat to thaw the ice that had begun to form around the nozzle. He handed it back to her with a nod, avoiding her eyes. Ross, now recovered but still weak, insisted on taking a turn pulling the sled. When Anya tried to wave him off, he just shook his head. I can do it, ma'am. Let me pull my weight. Even Director Evans was transformed. He had been a constant source of complaints, his fear manifesting as petulant whining. Now he was silent. He simply did as he was told, his eyes often drifting to Anya's back with a look of stunned disbelief. He had dismissed her. He had complained to procurement about the unsuitable personnel they had sent. The sheer, galactic scale of his misjudgment was slowly dawning on him. They reached the coordinates for Outpost Indigo 12 hours later. They were on the verge of collapse, their bodies screaming with exhaustion, their minds numb from the cold and the constant howl of the wind. Before them was nothing but a flat, featureless expanse of ice. There's nothing here, Evans said, his voice cracking with despair. You were wrong. Kellen, who was standing beside Anya, didn't even look at Evans. He just watched her. What are we looking for, ma'am? Anya didn't answer. She was scanning the ground, her headlamp beam tracing patterns in the snow. The wind, she murmured. Look at the patterns the wind makes on the snow. It's uniform, except for there. She pointed to a spot 30 feet away. To anyone else, it was identical to the rest of the landscape. But to her, it was an anomaly, a slight, almost imperceptible depression in the snow, where the wind patterns were subtly different. The bunker's ventilation shaft is triple filtered, but it still releases a microscopic amount of heat, she explained. Not enough to melt the snow, but just enough to change the air density above it. It disrupts the wind on a micro level. She walked to the spot and began digging with her hands. The others rushed to help, using their gloved hands and the small entrenching tool from the sled. A foot down, their fingers hit something hard and metallic. It was a steel hatch, its surface covered in ice. It was frozen solid. Kellen, Decker, and Ross threw their weight against the handle, but it wouldn't budge. It seized, Kellen grunted, his muscles straining. Anya watched them for a moment. Then she went to the sled and returned with the pry bar and the small block and tackle. Stop, she said. You'll waste energy and break your hands. She examined the hatch, her flashlight beam tracing its edges. She found what she was looking for. Two small, almost invisible anchor points welded into the frame, designed for exactly this purpose. She expertly rigged the block and tackle, hooking one end to an anchor point and the other to the handle. She wedged the pry bar into the seam to provide initial lift. Kellen, Decker, pull. Steady, rhythmic force. Don't jerk it, she instructed. They took the rope. With the mechanical advantage of the pulley system, their effort was magnified. With a deafening shriek of protesting metal, the ice seal broke. The hatch groaned, then lifted a few inches. A puff of warm, musty air, the first air they had felt in half a day that didn't burn their lungs, washed over their faces. It was the smell of safety, the smell of life. Kellen and Decker heaved the hatch open. It revealed a dark, vertical shaft with a steel ladder leading down into blackness. Anya was the first one down, her headlamp beam cutting into the darkness. The others followed, one by one, descending from the howling hell of the surface into the quiet sanctuary of the earth. The bunker was just as she had described it, Spartan, utilitarian, and blessedly warm. A single geothermal pipe ran along the ceiling, radiating a constant, gentle heat. The air was dry and still. They collapsed on the floor, the accumulated exhaustion of the past day hitting them like a physical blow. But Anya didn't rest. While the others were shedding their frozen outer layers, she was moving through the bunker, her steps echoing in the concrete space. She found the radio room. It was a small, shielded alcove containing a massive, ancient-looking high-frequency transceiver. It was a relic, all vacuum tubes and heavy copper wiring. She flicked a heavy-duty switch. The tubes began to glow with a faint orange light. A low hum filled the room. It had power. Kellen had followed her. He stood in the doorway watching her. He had stripped off his parka, and in the simple thermal shirt he looked smaller, younger. The arrogance had been flayed from him by the storm and the truth. "Master Chief?" he asked, his voice soft, tentative. It was the first time anyone had used her former rank. Anya's hands paused on the radio's tuning knob. She didn't turn around. "That was a long time ago, Kellen. 20 years, the tablet said. 21, actually." She corrected him, her voice flat. "I retired last year. Wanted something quiet, a wry, almost invisible smile touched her lips. This was supposed to be quiet. He took a step into the room. "In the warehouse when I pushed you, and I swung at you," he couldn't finish. The memory was too shameful. You could have broken my neck, or my arm. You could have killed me." "It's not my job to kill stupid, arrogant boys, Kellen," she said, her eyes still on the radio. "It's my job to keep people alive. Sometimes even the ones who don't deserve it." The rebuke was soft, but it landed with the force of a hammer blow. She turned the dial, and the radio crackled. Static filled the small room. She put on a heavy pair of headphones and began to tap out a message on a Morse key, her fingers moving in a rapid, flawless rhythm. SOS. Polaris 6. CME. Catastrophic failure. 8 survivors at Outpost Indigo. Coordinates to follow. Request immediate evac. She repeated the message, her focus absolute. Kellen stood there, watching the woman who had saved them all. The logistics clerk. The quiet, middle-aged woman he had deemed worthless. He had stood on the shoulders of a giant and tried to swat her like a fly. The depth of his own ignorance was a chasm, and he was only now beginning to see the bottom. He backed out of the room, leaving her to her work. The others were asleep, or close to it, scattered on the floor in a state of near-total exhaustion. He walked over to the supply closet and found a small, portable stove and a kettle. He found packets of coffee. He heated the water, his movements slow and deliberate. He poured a single cup, black, no sugar. He carried it back to the radio room. Anya was still there, listening intently to the static, waiting for a response that might not come for hours or days. She didn't hear him approach. Kellen stopped at the doorway. He didn't speak. He just held out the steaming mug. Anya slowly turned her head. She looked at the mug, then up at his face. His eyes were red-rimmed with exhaustion and shame, but for the first time, they held a look of profound, unconditional respect. It was the look of a subordinate to a trusted leader, an apology and a promise offered in a single, simple gesture. She took the mug. Her cold fingers brushed against his. She didn't say thank you. She didn't need to. She just gave him a single, slow nod. It was an acceptance, an acknowledgement. He returned the nod, a sharp, almost military motion. Then he turned and walked away, leaving her alone in the warm glow of the vacuum tubes. Anya took a sip of the hot, bitter coffee. Outside, the storm continued to rage, but down in the quiet heart of the earth, a new order had been established. Respect hadn't been demanded. It had been forged in darkness and ice, and it was as solid and as real as the ground beneath their feet. She looked at the radio, then took another slow sip, her watch just beginning.